Eleanor Ainsworth spent 11 years taking every picture in Highfold House down off its nail to clean it. Every spring. Alone, because no one else would climb the steps. And on the day her father-in-law's house was divided, she stood in the hall while her sister-in-law pointed at the great portrait, their great-grandmother, the pride of the family, and said it would suit her own fireplace best. Eleanor did not argue. She had washed the back of that canvas with her own cloth. She knew what was written there. Augusta said it in front of a dozen gathered Ainsworths. She said it loud. "You married into this family, Eleanor. You can hardly expect to keep what you never came from." 80 years the family had bowed to that face in the hall. Every head in the room nodded along with her. But Eleanor had read the back of that picture in 1851. She had read the name inked on the wood. She had read the date. And she knew that name did not belong to the woman they all bowed to. She said nothing. Not then. Not for the 14 years that followed. If you believe old hands know things young eyes can't see, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one find you, take a moment and subscribe so the next one does too. And do something for me. Comment the county or the country you're watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The house was called Highfold. It stood in the Shropshire Hills below Clee, near a small village named Bramfield, where the wind came down off the high ground all winter long and rattled the sashes till they wept. It was not a grand house, whatever the family liked to think. It was a good stone house with cold flags and a great deal of pride, and the pride was the largest thing in it. Eleanor came to it in 1840. She was a clockmaker's daughter out of Ludlow. Her father, old Marsh, kept a narrow shop on Corve Street, and Eleanor had grown up among the ticking of 40 movements and the smell of oil and brass. She had clever hands. She knew how a small thing worked. She knew that the face of a clock told you the hour, but the works behind it told you the truth of whether it kept time at all. She had learned that young. She would need it later. She married Thomas Ainsworth. Thomas was the younger of the two Ainsworth sons, a mild man, gentle enough, fond of a quiet evening and fonder still of not being troubled. He loved her in his soft way. But he was the younger son, and a younger son of a proud family learns early to keep his head down and let his brother lead. That was Thomas. He led nothing. He wanted peace above all things, and he paid for it, though he never seemed to notice the price. So Eleanor came to live under old Aldous Ainsworth's roof, the wife of the second son, the tradesman's daughter, married up. And from the first day she understood her place in that house, without anyone telling her. She was welcome the way a good pair of hands is welcome, not the way a daughter is. She did not sulk over it. That was not her nature. She rolled up her sleeves instead. She scrubbed the flags in the great kitchen till they came up pale. She kept the linen, counted it, mended it, laid it away with lavender. She managed the two girls they kept for the rough work, and she did half the rough work herself besides. When the master wanted his study set to rights, it was Eleanor. When the copper wanted scouring, it was Eleanor. When a guest was coming and the house must shine, it was Eleanor who made it shine, standing back afterward in her plain grey dress, while the family took the credit for the polish. And every spring she cleaned the pictures. Highfold had a good many pictures, dark landscapes, a hunting scene or two, some stiff old Ainsworths in their frames, going brown with age. No one else would touch them. The maids were afraid of dropping them. The family thought it beneath them. So it fell to Eleanor, as most true work in that house fell to Eleanor. She would fetch the tall steps from the scullery. She would lift each picture down with great care, one at a time, and carry it to the long table by the window where the light was good. And there she would clean it, the front with a soft dry cloth and the gentlest touch, and the back, the frame, the cord, all of it, because Eleanor did not do a thing by halves. She knew every picture in that house the way a mother knows her children's faces. She knew which cord was fraying. She knew which frame had woodworm. She knew things about those pictures that not one Ainsworth by blood had ever troubled to learn. You are going to want to remember that. Now, there was one picture in Highfold that stood above all the rest. It hung in the entrance hall, in the place of honour, so that it was the first thing a visitor saw on stepping through the door. A three-quarter portrait of a handsome woman. She wore a pale gown in the old fashion, and her hair was dressed high, and she looked out of the canvas with a cool, direct, faintly amused expression, as though she knew something the viewer did not. She was rather beautiful, and she was, the family said, the very heart of the Ainsworth name. Honoria Ainsworth, old Aldous would say, standing beneath her with his thumbs in his waistcoat. Our great-grandmother, painted by Sir William Beechey himself. 80 years she's hung in that spot, sir, and please God she'll hang there 80 more. He told it to every visitor. He told it the same way every time, in the same rolling voice, and every time the visitor would look up at the cool, beautiful face and murmur that it was a fine thing, a very fine thing, to have such a portrait by such a hand. Beechey, a painter to the king. It was the family's proudest possession, and more than that, it was the family's proof that the Ainsworths were what they said they were. Old, established, worth something. That face in the hall was the story the family told about itself, hung on a nail for all to see, and the front of it carried so much weight, so much pride, so many years of being bowed to, that in 80 years not one of them had ever thought to turn it over and look at the back. Not one. Except Eleanor, but we will come to that. First you must understand how it was for her in that house, because the great insult of the day the house was divided did not come out of nowhere. It came out of 1,000 small ones laid down year on year like dust on a shelf. They would correct her on her own family's history, the family she had married into and served for 20 years, and they would correct her wrongly. She would hear one of the younger cousins telling a guest that Honoria had been painted in London, and Eleanor knew, from a letter she had found and read while sorting the master's papers, that the family had never taken Honoria to London in her life. But she said nothing. What was the use? They read their history off the front of a frame and off each other's confident voices, and a quiet correction from Thomas's wife would only earn her a cool look. Thomas's Ludlow wife. That was what she was, at the edges of the family. Said kindly enough by some, said less kindly by Augusta. The clockmaker's girl, good with her hands. Not quite one of us. They did not consult her. When a decision was made about the house, a repair, a change, a thing bought or sold, it was made among the men and told to the women, and Eleanor heard of it last of all, though she knew the house better than the whole tribe of them put together. She knew where the damp came in. She knew which chimney drew and which one smoked. She knew the house down to its bones, because she had scrubbed those bones on her knees, and she was the last to be asked and the first to be forgotten. She bore it. She told herself that silence was the only dignity an outsider was allowed. That was the belief she lived by, and it was half wise and half a trap, and it would very nearly cost her everything before the end. She believed that her truth, whatever it was, would only ever be heard as a grievance, as grasping, as the tradesman's daughter reaching above her station. So she kept her truths to herself, folded away small, like the good linen, and she was gentle, and she was competent, and she was unthanked, and if you had met her then, you would have loved her at once, and wondered why no one in that house seemed to. Now we come to the spring of 1851. Remember that year. Everything turns on it. It was to be Eleanor's last spring at Highfold. She and Thomas had at last taken a small house of their own down in Bramfield village, modest, 2 good rooms and a scullery, nothing like the big house, but their own. They were to move at midsummer, and so this was the last time Eleanor would do the spring cleaning of the Highfold pictures. She meant to do it properly, as she did all things. She left the great portrait for last, the way you save the most important task. It was a heavy thing in its gilt frame, and getting it down alone was no small matter. She set the tall steps firm. She climbed. She worked her fingers behind the frame and lifted it off its two great hooks, taking the weight against her chest, and came down the steps slow, one at a time, feeling for each with her foot. She carried it to the long table by the window and laid it face up in the good light. She cleaned the front first. The cool, amused face came up brighter under her cloth, the pale gown, the high-dressed hair. She worked gently around the eyes, the way she always did, as though the woman might mind. Then, as she always did, with every picture in that house, she turned it over to clean the back. And she stopped. Most of the backs she knew by heart. Bare stretched canvas gone brown, or a bit of old paper, dust, cobweb, the ordinary furniture of the reverse of a picture. But this one, she had cleaned it before, year on year, but she had never truly looked, because there had never been reason to look. This spring, in the strong flat light of her last cleaning, with time on her hands and care in her heart, she looked. There was writing on the wooden stretcher. Old ink, faded to the colour of weak tea, but clear enough to a patient eye in good light. A name. She read it, and it was not Honoria. It was another name entirely, a woman's name, and beneath it a few words more, and, she leaned close, a date. And there was a label. A small printed trade label, pasted to the wood and gone yellow, the sort of label a dealer or a framer sticks on the back of his work. She read that too. A Ludlow name. A Ludlow Street. A carver and gilder and print seller, right there in the town where she had grown up, where her own father's shop stood not 3 doors off, most likely, from this very man's. Eleanor stood very still with the great picture turned over on the table, and the beautiful cool face looking down at the boards, and she read the back 3 times over to be sure her eyes had it right. The name was not the family's name. The date was wrong, and the label was the mark of a Ludlow tradesman, not the studio of a painter to the king. Now understand, Eleanor was a clockmaker's daughter. She knew the difference between the face of a thing and the works behind it. She knew that the front of this picture said one thing, in 80 years of family pride, and the back of it said quite another, in the plain honest ink of whoever had first stretched the canvas, and she knew which of the two was more likely to be telling the truth. The front is what a thing wants you to believe. The back is what it is. She did not shout. She did not run for the family. She was not made that way, and her whole life in that house had taught her to be careful with what she knew. But that evening, quietly, when she and Thomas were alone, she told her husband. She thought a wife might tell her husband a strange thing without it being called grasping. "Thomas," she said, "I cleaned the great portrait today, the Honoria." She hesitated. The back of it says something different. There's a name on the stretcher that isn't hers, and a date, and a Ludlow dealer's label. "Thomas, I don't think it's what your father says it is." Thomas was tired. Thomas was always tired in the evenings, and Thomas did not want a strange thing put in front of him at the end of a long day. He did not even look up properly. Some dealers muddle, love, he said. Old pictures get all sorts stuck on the back. Leave it. Don't go raising it with father, he'd not thank you. And he turned back to the fire. Leave it. 3 words. That was all it took to bury the truth for 14 years. Eleanor looked at the back of her husband's head, and she thought about the name on the stretcher, and she thought about 80 years of pride hung on a nail in the hall, and she thought about what it would mean, Thomas's Ludlow wife, the clockmaker's daughter, standing up in that proud family to say that their great-grandmother, their Beechey, their proof, was none of those things. She thought about the cool looks. She thought about the word that would surely follow her, grasping. And she left it. She folded the truth away small, with the rest of her truths, and she did not raise it again. You see how it works. Her knowing was the very thing that stopped her from speaking. A married-in tradesman's daughter contradicting the family's proudest possession, there was no way on earth that could be heard as anything but spite, as reaching, as the outsider trying to pull down what she could never be part of. The more certain she was, the more impossible it became to say. Her truth had become a thing she could not afford to own. So she carried it out of Highfold at midsummer, silent, down to the little house at Bramfield, and she said nothing, and the years went by. 11 years went by. And in 1862, old Aldous Ainsworth died. He died in his bed at Highfold, a proud man to the last, and after the funeral the family gathered to divide the house between the two brothers' households. It was done informally, as such things often were, no lawyer standing over every teapot, just the family in the great hall, going through the contents, deciding who should have what: Charles, the elder son, and his wife Augusta, Thomas, the younger, and Eleanor, and a dozen more Ainsworth relations besides, cousins and aunts, come for the funeral and staying for the sharing out. All of them milling about the hall where the pictures hung, and there, over all of them, hung Honoria. The cool, amused face, looking down on the division of the house, exactly where she had hung for 80 years. Augusta wanted her. Augusta was the elder brother's wife, and Augusta had made herself over the years into the keeper of the family's name. She had married Charles, and she had taken to the Ainsworth pride as though she had been born to it, more fiercely by far than any Ainsworth born. She loved the standing of the family. She loved being seen to belong to it. And more than any object in that house, she loved that portrait, because that portrait was the proof, and Augusta wanted to be the one who held the proof. She had never once turned it over. Of course she hadn't. Augusta was not a woman who turned things over. She mistook possession for knowledge her whole life long. To own the picture was, to her, to know it. To hang it over her own hearth was to own the whole 80 years of story, and to become, herself, the next line in it. She wanted the front. She had never in her life imagined there was a back, so when the family came to the pictures, Augusta spoke first, and she spoke loudest. "The portrait, of course, must come to us," she said, "to Charles and me. It's only right it should hang in the elder household. I shall put her over my own fireplace, where she'll be seen properly." She smiled around at the gathered relations, gathering their agreement the way she gathered everything, where the family can honour her as she deserves. And here is where the whole thing might have turned. And did not. Eleanor was in that hall. Eleanor stood by the wall in her plain dark dress, Thomas beside her, and Eleanor knew. Eleanor alone in all that crowd of proud Ainsworths knew what was written on the back of the thing they were all bowing to. She had only to say it. One sentence. The back says another name, the back says another date. That is not Honoria and it is not a Beechey. I cleaned it with my own hands and I read it. She said nothing. Perhaps she might have found the courage even so, for the picture, for the truth of it, if Augusta had let it lie. But Augusta could not let anything lie. She saw Eleanor by the wall, quiet, and something in Eleanor's quiet must have looked to Augusta like a claim, or the shadow of one, and Augusta moved to crush it before it could ever be made. She turned, in front of the whole family, in front of the dozen gathered relations, and she looked at Eleanor, and she said it. "You married into this family, Eleanor." Her voice was clear, and it carried, and it was meant to carry. "You can hardly expect to keep what you never came from." The hall went quiet for half a moment. And then, this is the part you must feel, every head nodded, not cruelly, most of them, just easily. Comfortably, because it was, to them, simply true. She had married in. She was Thomas's Ludlow wife. She had come from a shop on Corve Street with clocks in the window. What claim could she have on the great-grandmother in the hall? The family bowed to the front of the picture, and the family agreed with Augusta. And it never once crossed a single mind in that room that the tradesman's daughter standing silent by the wall was the only living soul who knew the truth of the thing they were fighting over. Eleanor looked at the floor. She said nothing. Silence was the only dignity an outsider was allowed. She still believed it. In that moment, with the whole family's agreement pressing on her, to speak now would be exactly what Augusta said it would be. Grasping, spite, the outsider clutching at what was not hers. Her truth had never been more certain and never been more impossible to say. So they took the portrait down. Two of the men lifted it off its two great hooks, the same hooks Eleanor had lifted it from herself, alone 11 springs running. They carried it out through the hall, the cool, amused face going past all the gathered relations, out of the place it had hung for 80 years, out to Augusta's waiting cart. And Eleanor watched the back of it go past her, the plain brown reverse she knew so well, the stretcher, the ink, the little Ludlow label, all of it turned to her for one moment as they carried it out the door, the whole truth of it, passing 3 feet from her face, and not one other person in that hall with eyes to read it. She watched it go, and she held her peace. That is the loudest silence you will hear in this story. Hold on to it. So Augusta carried the great portrait home to the elder household, and she hung it over her own fireplace, high in the place of honor, and she stood back and looked up at it with the deep satisfaction of a woman who has got the thing she wanted most in the world. There she was, the keeper of the name. The proof of the family hung over her own hearth, for every visitor to see, and Augusta the one to tell its story now. And Eleanor went home to Bramfield, to the small house, the 2 good rooms and the scullery. The plain parlour with the fire she laid herself. She hung no great portraits, she had none. She had a clockmaker father's few things, and the plain furniture of a modest life, and she set about keeping it clean and warm as she kept everything clean and warm. And here is where you might expect the story to turn hard, where the wronged woman begins to plot, where she sets about her revenge. She did not. That was not Eleanor. Understand her, because everything to come depends on it. The pain of that day did not curdle in her into scheming. It settled, slowly over the weeks that followed, into something quieter and far harder to shake. Resolve. But her resolve was not to bring the family down. Her resolve was to keep her peace, to hold her tongue and her dignity, and to go on being what she was, and to let the truth stay buried, because she had decided long ago that she would never be the one to dig it up and be called grasping for it. She would not break it. Whatever came, it would not be Eleanor who broke it. She was, in a way, still protecting them, still cleaning up after a family that would not thank her. Only now the thing she was quietly tending was their pride and the great lie of the front of a picture, and she was tending it by saying nothing at all. And in the elder household, the story went on being told, grander every time. Under Augusta's fireplace, at every gathering, the tale of Honoria grew. Augusta told it now, the way old Aldous had told it, thumbs in her metaphorical waistcoat, and where Aldous had said painted by Sir William Beechey, Augusta said the great Beechey, painter to His Majesty, you know, and where Aldous had said 80 years in the hall, Augusta added little flourishes of her own. A story of how Honoria had sat for the great man, how she had charmed him, how the family had always been people of consequence. Each telling a little grander, each telling a little further from the plain ink on the plain wood a foot behind the canvas. And every time she told it, the picture hung there over the fire, with its face to the room and its back to the wall. And no one ever turned it around. Think of what you know that they do not. That is the whole engine of this story now. You hold the back of the picture, you have read it, you know the name is wrong and the date is wrong, and the painter is a Ludlow tradesman, not a knight of the brush. And there sits the whole proud family, gathered under the hearth, bowing to the front, telling the tale. And there sits Augusta, the keeper of a name she has never once turned over to check. The room bows to the front, you hold the back. And somewhere down in Bramfield, Eleanor holds it too, and says nothing, and lays her own small fire, and waits, though she does not know she is waiting, and she would tell you she is waiting for nothing at all. Years passed that way. The truth sat quiet in two places only, on the back of the canvas over Augusta's fire, and behind Eleanor's still grey eyes down in the village. And it might have sat there forever. Some truths do. Some backs of pictures are never read, and the story on the front becomes, in the end, the only story there is, simply because everyone who could have said otherwise chose to hold their peace. But that is not what happened here. Because something began to go wrong in the elder household, and it began with money. Word came down to Bramfield the way word does in a small county, a little here, a little there, at the market, over a wall, from Mrs. Corvin, the neighbour who always heard things first. Charles Ainsworth, the elder brother, the proud one, the holder of the family's standing. Charles had been speculating. Charles had put the family's money into ventures that a wiser man would have left alone, and Charles had lost. There was trouble at the bank. There were letters. There was, Mrs. Corvin said, lowering her voice, talk of the household having to sell. Eleanor heard it, and she said nothing. Of course she said nothing. But something moved in her that she had not felt in a long time. Not triumph. Do not mistake her even now. There was no gladness in her at the family's trouble. But there was a thought, small and quiet and entirely her own, that came to her by her own fire one evening and would not leave. If the elder household must sell its contents, then the things of the old house, the things of Highfold, would go under the hammer. Strangers would carry them off. And among all those things there was one, just one, that Eleanor wanted. Not the great portrait, not the proof, not the lie in its gilt frame. Something else. Something small and dark and unregarded, that she remembered from the old days at Highfold, from her years of cleaning, that no one else had ever thought worth a second glance. She did not tell Thomas what she was thinking. She did not tell anyone. She only went, quietly, to the small locked box where she kept her own savings, the little she had put by over the years, a coin at a time, the private hoard of a woman who had never had much of her own, and she counted it out on the table by her candle, and she thought, when the day comes and the old house is sold, I will go. I will take my own money, and I will go to the sale, and I will try to buy back one thing of Highfold. For memory's sake. For no reason but that. It was the only move she would ever make in this whole long story. And it unmasked nothing. It exposed no one. It was not a plot, and it was not a revenge. It was a woman with a little saved money meaning to buy back one small remembered thing before strangers took it all away. But the sale that Eleanor meant to attend, so quietly, with her own coins and her own reasons, that sale was to be held by a firm out of Ludlow, Pardoe Sons, of Corve Street, an old provincial house, sound and respectable, that had been putting county contents under the hammer for 30 years and more. And Josiah Pardoe, who would stand at the rostrum that day and lift the great portrait to the room, had one settled habit, a small thing, a routine of his trade kept for 30 years that everyone in the county who knew him knew about and thought nothing of, because it was only Pardoe being Pardoe. Before he would take a single bid on any picture, before the first offer, every time, without fail, Josiah Pardoe turned the canvas round to face the room, and he read the back of it aloud. Word of it came, as most things came to Bramfield, through Mrs. Corvin. She had it from her sister, who had it from a woman in service at Ludlow, and she brought it to Eleanor's door on a wet morning with the particular brightness of a woman carrying bad news about her betters. Charles Ainsworth was ruined. That was the plain shape of it, under all the softening words. The speculation he had put the family's money into, railway land, or a canal, or shares in some works out toward Wolverhampton, nobody was quite sure, had gone sour in his hands. £460, Mrs. Corvin said on the doorstep, in a whisper you could have heard across the lane. called in by the bank, the Ludlow and Corvedale, and they've given him 30 days, Eleanor, 30 days, and not an hour more. Eleanor stood in her own doorway. Behind her were the 2 good rooms and a scullery that she and Thomas had lived in for 23 years. Small rooms, warm ones. Hers, she thought of the elder household, she thought of the fireplace and the face above it, and Augusta standing under it these last 13 years, telling the story to anyone who would sit still. And the contents to be sold, she said. It was not a question. All of it, said Mrs. Corve, nodding hard. Every stick. Pardoe's men have been at the house a week, they say, writing it all down in their book. Eleanor said thank you, and shut the door gently, and stood a while with her hand still on the latch. So it had come. Not by her doing. Not by any word she had ever spoken. Charles had done it himself, with his own greed and his own hidden ledgers, the way a man tears the roof off his own house and calls it improvement. She had lifted no finger. She never would. The one hope of that whole failing household, everyone said, was the portrait, Honoria, by Beechey, a great-grandmother by a royal hand. Mrs. Corve had heard the figure the very men from Pardoe's had let slip. A family picture, an old attribution, the sort of thing that made a country sale worth a London dealer's train fare. £180, 220 if the bidding ran warm, £180 against 460 owed. It would not clear the debt, but it would be the loudest single lot of the day, and Augusta was pinning what remained of her pride to it. If the county came, and the dealers came, and the great face did its work as it had always done its work, then the Ainsworth name might yet walk out of that sale-room with its head up. Eleanor knew what was written on the back of that name. She had known for 14 years. The catalogue was printed within the fortnight, and Mrs. Corve, who could not read a great deal, but could read enough, brought a copy that her sister had got in Ludlow and laid it on Eleanor's table like a relic. Eleanor put on her spectacles. She turned the cheap grey pages, past the beds and the linen presses and the fire-irons, past the whole of a household's life reduced to numbered lots, and she found it. Lot 109. A portrait of Honoria Ainsworth, 3/4 length, the property of a gentleman. Attributed to Sir William Beechey, R.A. She read it twice. She read the front of the thing, the story, the 80 years of it, set down in an auctioneer's careful print, and in her mind, as clear as if the canvas lay face down on her own scullery table under her own wet cloth, she read the back. The old ink, the name that was not Honoria's, the little yellow label of a Ludlow dealer. The date. 2 things, describing one picture. One of them was in the catalogue, the other was on the wood. She took off her spectacles and folded them. She told no one what she meant to do, not even Thomas. Thomas sat across the hearth from her that same evening with his pipe, an old man now, gentle and grey, and he said it was a hard business about Charles, a hard business, and he supposed the family would weather it as families did. Eleanor agreed that it was hard. She did not say that she was going to Ludlow on the day of the sale. She did not say that she had counted out the coins in her locked box 3 times over, and she did not say the other thing, the small thing she wanted. Because it was not the great portrait she meant to buy. She had no dream of that. £180 or 6 or 60, it was all one to her, all beyond her, and besides she did not want the stranger's handsome face that the family had bowed to for 80 years. She wanted something else, something she had carried in her memory from her cleaning days. There had been, in a back passage at Highfold, past the still room, in the dim part of the house where the good light never reached, a small, dark oval, a portrait of a lady in an old frame gone black with age. No one had ever looked at it twice. No one had ever told a story about it. It hung where hats were hung, where the damp got in, and old Aldous, who could talk for an hour on the great face in the hall, had never once so much as named it. Eleanor had dusted it every spring for 11 years. She did not know who it was. She only knew that it had a kind face, and that nobody had ever wanted it, and that in a house full of people who prized the wrong things, she had grown fond of the one thing they all passed by. That was what she wanted. That, and nothing more. A 4-shilling picture from a back passage, if it went so cheap, to hang in her own small room. For memory's sake, the elder household's whole life went to Pardoe's, to the sale room on Corve Street in Ludlow. The vans came for it. Augusta, they said, was not humbled by any of it. Augusta had decided the sale was a kind of triumph waiting to happen. The county would come, the great picture would carry the room, Beechey's name and the family's name would do together what they had always done, and the shame of Charles's debt would be swallowed up in a morning's grand receipts. She was, by every account, entirely confident. She had never in her life turned that picture over. It did not enter her head that there was anything to turn over. The front was the whole of it. The front had always been the whole of it. For her. It was Mrs. Corve, again, who set the last piece in its place, though she never knew she had done it. They do say, she remarked, sitting in Eleanor's kitchen the week before the sale, warming her hands, that old Pardoe's a great one for his ways. My sister's had it from a man that's bought at his sales this 20 year. Before he'll take a single bid on a picture, any picture, he turns it round to the room and reads out the back of it, the name, the maker, whatever's writ there, reads it out loud every time, regular as church. Been doing it 30 years, they say. Won't be moved from it. She laughed. Fancy, as if the back of a thing mattered more than the face. Eleanor's needle did not stop. It went in, and it came out, and it went in again. Fancy, she said, and she thought, he will read it aloud. He will stand up before the whole county, before Augusta in her good bonnet and Charles by the door and the dealers on their benches, and he will turn my great-grandmother, who is not my great-grandmother, round to the room, and he will read the wood. Because it is his habit. Because it is Tuesday. Because he has done it 30 years and knows no other way to sell a picture. She had not planned it. She could never have planned it. In all the 14 years she had held her tongue, she had never once dreamed of a way to make the truth speak, without her having to be the one to speak it. The grasping outsider, the Ludlow wife, contradicting the family's proudest thing. That door had been shut to her since 1851. She had believed it would stay shut till she died. And now a stranger was going to open it. Not for her, not against anyone. Only because it was his trade, and his trade had a habit in it, and the habit did not care who was in the room. She did not go to Ludlow to make it happen. She went for the oval, and for the 4 shillings in her box, and for memory's sake. That the other thing would happen while she sat there, that she could no more have stopped than started. It was going to happen to the room, and she would only be one more body on a bench when it did. The sale was held at midsummer in the long upper room of Pardoe Sons on Corve Street. Eleanor went by the carrier's cart in the early morning and came into the town while the shops were still shuttered. She had put on her good dark dress. She sat, when she reached the sale room, well to the back and to the side, near a pillar. An ordinary woman of 50 with a plain bonnet and a small worn purse, and no one looked at her, and that was exactly as she wished it. The room filled. The gaslights hissed along the walls, for the day was bright outside, but the upper room kept its own dusk. She knew some of the faces. County people. A dealer or two down from further off. Hard-eyed men who turned things in their hands and named a price before they set them down. And near the front, in the 3rd row, in a bonnet trimmed for the occasion, sat Augusta. Eleanor saw the back of her sister-in-law's head, held high. Certain, a woman come to watch her family's name do its work. By the door stood Charles, older, heavier, a grey sweat on him even in the cool of the room. And beside Charles, quiet, in a good coat, a young man with a leather case under his arm who spoke to no one and watched everything. The bank's agent. Eleanor knew him for what he was the moment she saw him. He had come to see the £460 walk out of this room, or to know the reason why. Thomas was not there. Eleanor had not told him she was coming, and he had not thought to come. He was at home in Bramfield, in his chair, and he did not know that his wife sat by a pillar in Ludlow with her hands folded in her lap. Josiah Pardoe took the rostrum at 10. He was a spare, dry man of 60 or more, 30 years in the trade written all over him, unhurried and exact. He wore spectacles pushed up on his forehead and brought them down when he read. He worked through the early lots at a good country pace. The linen. The beds. A clock. Eleanor watched a clock go, a decent long case, and thought of her father on Corve Street, not 200 yards from where she sat, dead these many years, and how he would have looked at its movement and named its maker in a breath. The fire irons. A set of chairs. Augusta sat through all of it, straight-backed, waiting for the one lot that mattered. And then the men brought up lot 109. They carried it to the easel beside the rostrum, and there was a small stir in the room, the particular quiet that comes over a sale-room when the good thing arrives. The great portrait, the handsome woman in the dark dress, 3/4 length, the face the family had bowed to for 80 years, that had hung in the entrance hall of Highfold before any soul now living was born, and over Augusta's fireplace these 13 years since. The gaslight found the gilt of the frame and ran along it. Augusta's chin lifted a half-inch more. In the third row, a woman watching her whole certainty come true. Josiah Pardoe let the room look. He was in no hurry. Then he brought down his spectacles, and he took up the catalogue, and he read the front of the thing aloud in his dry, carrying voice. Lot 109. A portrait of Honoria Ainsworth. 3/4 length. The property of a gentleman. Attributed, and he gave the word its full weight, as auctioneers do, to Sir William Beechey, Royal Academician. A murmur ran along the benches. The dealers leaned in. Beechey, a royal hand, in a county sale-room. Somebody near Eleanor said a soft figure to his neighbour. 200, perhaps. The bidding might run warm indeed. And then Josiah Pardoe did the thing that everyone in the county who knew him knew he would do, and thought nothing of, because it was only Pardoe being Pardoe. He nodded to his man, and the two of them turned the great canvas round on its easel, gilt frame and all, so that its painted face looked away into the shadows, and its bare back, the old pine stretcher, the aged canvas, the wood, faced the whole bright room. "You'll bear with me, gentlemen," he said, as he had said 10,000 times in 30 years. "I read the back before I take your money. It's my way." He pushed his spectacles up and bent close to the wood into the light of the nearest gas bracket, and the room waited, indulgent, patient, expecting nothing. He found the label first. "There's a trade label here," he said, pasted to the stretcher, "gone yellow with age." He leaned nearer. He read it slowly, letter by letter, the way a careful man reads small old print. J. Caulfield, Carver, Gilder, and Print Seller. Broad Street, Ludlow. He straightened a little. He looked out over his spectacles at the room, and there was nothing in his face but the mild interest of a tradesman who has found a thing worth remarking. "That's a Ludlow dealer's label. Gentlemen, A-framers, a print seller's, from Broad Street. Not a stone's throw from this room. It's not the mark of the hand your catalogue names. Sir William Beechey did not send his pictures out under a Ludlow print seller's label." He paused. "I only tell you what the wood tells me." The murmur changed its note. It is a small thing, the sound a sale-room makes when a great attribution begins to die, but every man in the trade knows it. The dealers sat back. One of them, the hard-eyed one from away, made a short dry sound that was almost a laugh, and crossed something out in his catalogue with a pencil. In the third row, Augusta had gone very still. Pardoe bent to the wood again. He was not finished. He never hurried, and he never left a back half red. "There's a name here too," he said, inked on the stretcher. An old hand, old ink. He traced it, Eleanor saw, with one dry finger, as if to be sure of every letter. The sitter is named, and the name is not Honoria Ainsworth. He read it out, plain and clear, into the waiting room. "The lady is set down here as Miss Margaret Vane, of Ludlow." Now the room was not murmuring. The room was silent. Augusta's gloved hand had risen to the edge of the bench in front of her, and Josiah Pardoe, who did not know Augusta from Eve, who did not know Eleanor at all, who had no grievance and no part and no notion on this earth of what he was undoing, read the last thing on the wood, the date. He read it flat, and even and final, the way a man reads a figure off a page, with no more weight on it than on any other lot of the morning, and it fell on the room like a stone down a well. And here's the date the thing was painted. He peered. 1817. He took off his spectacles. "Well, gentlemen," he said, mild as milk, "I'll only put it to you as it puts itself to me. Whoever this lady was, she was not the lady in your catalogue. Miss Margaret Vane of Ludlow, by the look of the wood, in 1817, and the Honoria Ainsworth this house has always called her." He glanced at the catalogue and back at the room. "Why, I'm told the old lady died in 98. 1798. He let it sit. "That's 19 years, gentlemen, before ever the paint was wet on this canvas. A picture can't very well be a woman who was 19 years in her grave before the first brushstroke. Not by Beechey. Not by anyone." He set the catalogue down. "I'll take it as a portrait of an unknown lady," he said, "of the English school, and honestly framed in Ludlow. What am I bid?" For a moment nobody breathed. 80 years of a story stood on its head on an easel in a gaslit room, with its painted face turned to the wall, and a dry old man waiting, pencil ready, for an offer. Augusta did not turn round. Eleanor, from her pillar, could see only the side of her sister-in-law's face, and it was the colour of the whitewashed wall behind her. 13 years she had stood beneath that picture and told its story grander every time. Keeper of the name, proof of the blood. She had asked for it first and loudest in the hall at Highfold, before a dozen gathered Ainsworths, and she had said to a clockmaker's daughter, "You can hardly keep what you never came from," and she had carried it home over her own fireplace like a crown. And she had never, in all those years, once turned it over. The one thing that was hers to know, and she had never looked. Now a stranger had looked for her, in front of the county, and there was nothing in her face at all. It had all gone out of it. She sat as if she had been struck, and could not yet feel where. By the door, Charles made a sound. Eleanor heard it clearly in the silence, a small, wet, caught sound, like a man who has missed a step in the dark. His whole morning had rested on this lot. £180. 200 if it ran warm, something to throw against the 460 and the 30 days, something to make the bank's young man fold up his leather case and go home. Now he stood and watched his one great hope turn to the wall and named an unknown lady of the English school. The bidding, when it limped to life, was the bidding of dealers for a decent old frame with a nameless face inside it. £2. 3, 4, from the hard-eyed man. 5, £6, and the hammer, dry and final. £6. Eleanor watched the bank's agent step forward from the wall, quiet, unhurried, and lay 2 fingers on Charles's sleeve, and lean in to say something low that Charles did not answer. £6 against 460. The house would go now. There was no picture left to save it. There never had been. And Thomas was not in the room to see it, but Eleanor saw it for him, and knew what it would mean to him when she told him, or did not tell him. Some dealer's muddle, love, Leave it. He had waved it off in one line in their scullery in 1851, with his hand the way you wave off a fly. The whole truth of it, the whole ruin of it, held in her two hands with a wet cloth, and he had told her to leave it, and she had left it, because he was her husband, and a wife's contradiction was a small, ugly thing, and the family's picture was a great and settled one. 14 years. He had been wrong for 14 years, and she had been right for 14 years, and neither of them had ever said so. And the neighbours, the county faces on the benches, the people who had come to Highfold in the old days and stood in the hall and admired the great-grandmother by Beechey, who had nodded along to old Aldous telling the tale, who had watched Augusta carry her prize home and thought it only right, they were not looking at the picture now. One by one, in the way of a crowd, they were beginning to look elsewhere. Some of them, Eleanor felt rather than saw, had turned their heads toward the back of the room, toward the pillar, toward the plain woman in the dark dress who had cleaned that house for 11 years, who had married in from Ludlow, who had been told she could not keep what she never came from. They were doing the sum. She could feel them doing it. If the back of the picture had said this all along, and the woman who washed every picture in that house each spring had washed this one too, then she had known. Of course she had known. She had known, and she had said nothing, and they had all called her the Ludlow wife and corrected her on a history she understood better than any of them. Eleanor kept her face still. She had had 14 years of practice at keeping her face still. She did not smile. She did not weep. She looked as she had always looked, like a woman of no importance, sitting by a pillar, waiting for a small lot near the end of the day. She waited a long time. The great picture was carried away, the room's excitement ebbed, and the ordinary business of the sale went on, chair by chair, box by box, down through the long tail of the catalogue, where the cheap things are. Augusta rose at some point and went out stiffly on Charles's arm, and did not look at the room, and the room, kindly enough, did not look at her. It was afternoon before Pardoe came to the low lots, the odds and ends, the grimy passed-over things that go for shillings, and then a man brought up a small dark oval, in a frame gone black, and set it on the easel almost as an afterthought. Eleanor's hands tightened in her lap. There it was, the kind face from the back passage at Highfold, past the still room, where the damp got in and the good light never reached. Dusty, dim, nobody's treasure. She had dusted it every spring for 11 years and grown fond of it, the one thing in a house of prized wrong things that no one had ever wanted. Lot 241, said Josiah Pardoe, tired now, near the end of a long day. A small portrait of a lady. Unknown hand. Old frame. He did not turn it round. He did not read the back. It was a 4-shilling thing, and a man does not stoop to read the wood of a 4-shilling thing at 4 in the afternoon. Shall I say 5 shillings? 2, then. 2 shillings I'm bid. 4 shillings, said Eleanor. Her own voice in that room for the first time, small and steady. A few heads turned. Nobody knew her. 4 shillings, said Pardoe mildly. Any advance on 4? No? At 4 shillings, then, the hammer came down, dry and light, to the lady at the back. She paid her 4 shillings to the clerk at the table by the door, in the coins she had carried from her locked box in Bramfield, and she took the small dark oval in her 2 hands, and she carried it out of the sale-room on Corve Street into the light of a Ludlow afternoon, past the very street where her father had mended clocks, and she went home on the carrier's cart with it wrapped in her shawl on her lap. It was evening when she reached her own 2 rooms. Thomas was asleep in his chair. She did not wake him. She set the oval on her own scullery table, by her own candle. And she did the thing she had always done, the thing she had done to every picture in Highfold every spring for 11 years, the thing that Augusta had never once done in her life. She turned it over. She wiped the dust from the old wood with the edge of her apron, and there, in ink so old it had gone the colour of weak tea, in a plain hand, on the back of the little oval that had hung among the hats and the damp in a back passage, while a stranger reigned in the Hall of Honour, she read it. Honoria Ainsworth. From the Life. 1794, Eleanor sat down slowly at her table, 4 years before the old lady died. Painted from the life, the real woman, the true great-grandmother, the one whose blood ran in Charles and Thomas and all the dozen gathered Ainsworths who had bowed for 80 years to a Ludlow spinster in a gilt frame. Here she was, the real one, in a black oval that nobody had valued, sold off among the fire-irons for 4 shillings, while the false one hung in the place of honour and broke a household when at last a stranger read her back. Eleanor looked a long while at the kind, plain, honest face in the candlelight. She did not feel triumph. She was too old and too tired and had held her peace too long to feel anything so sharp. She felt something quieter than that. She felt that a thing had come home. She said nothing. She told no one. She only cleaned the little picture, gently, the way she knew how, and she found a nail in her own small parlour, in a good soft light near the window, and she hung the true Honoria Ainsworth there, in the house of the Ludlow wife who had never come from anywhere. A year went by. It was midsummer again when Thomas, sitting by the window one evening, looked up at the small oval in its plain black frame, as he had looked at it 100 times since she brought it home, and he was quiet for a while. He was a very old man now. Then he said, without turning his head, "You were right, Eleanor, in 51. When you told me the back said something different, and I told you to leave it." He folded his old hands. "You were right, and I was a fool, and I've known it a year now, and I'm sorry for it." Eleanor went on with her sewing, the needle in and out and in. "I know," she said, not unkindly, and that was all either of them ever said about it. The elder household was gone by then. The house sold, the debt answered at last by the whole of the sale and the loss of everything. Charles and Augusta removed to lodgings somewhere the county did not see them, and in the parlour of that lost house, before the strangers came, there had been, for anyone who cared to look, one last thing to see. Over the fireplace where the great portrait had hung for 13 years, on the chimney breast, a bare rectangle of wall, paler than the wall around it, the clean, unfaded shape of a picture that was no longer there, and a story that could no longer be told. Nobody dusted it. Nobody read its back. There was nothing behind it at all. There are families that inherit a story and hang it in the hall and bow to it and tell it grander every year, and never once in 80 years turn it over to see what the wood says. And there are families that read the back of the picture. It is not a matter of blood, or of grand names, or of who married in from where. It is only a matter of who is willing to lift the thing down and turn it round and look at the truth on the other side, even when the truth is plain and poor and hung in a back passage. Only one of those two families ever really knows who it is. Eleanor Ainsworth knew. She had always known. And in the end she did not have to say a single word. The back of the picture said it for her, in a gaslit room on Corve Street, to the whole of the county at once. If you've ever been the one who knew and held your peace and waited, I think this story was for you. Comment the town or the county you're watching from tonight. I'd like to see how far this one has travelled.